Is it really possible to go from a 2026 $50,000 portfolio in Bitcoin to a 6.5 million US dollar portfolio in 2035, 2036? And can you actually retire on that? And what is the best strategy once you get that? How to retire? Should you just keep on spending a Bitcoin, borrowing against it, or just like sell some and then like do all those things? This and a lot more I talked today about with Zane Truscott, one of the most respected, in my opinion, people when it comes to Bitcoin and retirement. Most of his content, most of his focus is on this one specific topic. So we can learn a lot from him. Enjoy. How are you doing, Zane? What's up?
Great to see you, Robin. Really good to be with you on opposite sides of the globe, but looking forward to talking all things Bitcoin.
Absolutely, yeah. It's good. It's nice because like it's for me it's morning and for you it's like evening. And when I start my live streams, I mean this is not a live stream, but when I start my live stream, I'm always saying good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, because it's like someone will watch in the evening and someone will watch in the morning, and it's like, how do you greet everyone? That's the only way. So good evening to you and good morning to me.
Yeah, well, that's one of the benefits of being a global figure, my friend. You're a global figure.
A small figure, but yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about today about retirement. I think this is a topic that so many people are really, really interested in. And it's also, I think, one of the main reasons now, I don't know if it's the main reason, but like one of the main reasons that people buy Bitcoin. That people like, hey, I am now, 30, 40 years old, and at some point I will retire, and I think Bitcoin is the best vehicle to do that. Maybe let's get started just with the question of how do you look at Bitcoin as a retirement vehicle in general?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And, you know, I guess I've had the benefit over the past 6 to 12 months of having many one-on-one conversations with people who I would say in their mid-40s and above, who are really starting to get very concerned about their retirement. Okay, and so when I think about retirement in this country, in Australia, we have what's called superannuation, and in the US they have a similar thing called a 401k. But essentially it's this promise that when we get to retirement age, we're going to have this nest egg, this pool of savings or capital, whatever it might be, that is going to sustain us and take care of us into retirement and hopefully for the rest of our life. But the problem is that that whole system is really broken now. In fact, I would go as far as to say we've actually been sold a lie. And so, you know, a lot of the conversations I have with people these days, Robin, are around restructuring their thinking, first of all, in terms of realizing that the old system that we've had and that we've depended on is now broken. So understanding that, and we can go into some facts and figures around that, particularly in Australia, figures that I'm familiar with about, you know, why most Australians realize on the eve of retirement, they simply don't have enough. We can talk about that, but it's about rethinking, you know, and realizing that we're moving into a new era. And that takes an understanding of the history of money and the legacy financial system and TradFi and that entire system that we've entrusted our financial lives to, right? And most of us have given it no thought. And so we get to this place where we start to think to ourselves, hold on a minute, I've just been working for the past 20, 30, maybe even 40 years. And now I'm starting to think to myself, how long is this going to go on for? You know, am I actually going to be able to retire in 10 or 12 years from now, or 15 years from now, whatever it might be? In Australia, the retirement age is 65. I'm not sure what it is where you are officially, Robin, but I think for most of the Western world, it's, you know, it's kind of considered that mid-60s is retirement age. But I think most people just have this false illusion as to what it's going to take to actually retire and to fund their retirement, and not only fund their retirement in a comfortable way, but also what is the very real prospect of retirees being able to leave a financial legacy for their family and their kids. So I know there's a bit to unpack there, Robin, but yeah, it's all about realizing that the old system is broken. Traditional superannuation is not keeping up with real inflation. And most people have no idea about that one very important fact. And once we get through that, we then talk about why Bitcoin is a solution. And for me, Bitcoin is front and center in the conversation for the simple reason that over the past 10 to 15 years since Bitcoin's been around, it has proven to be the best performing asset. And I don't like using or considering Bitcoin as an asset. Most people think of it as an asset. We know that it's actually a monetary transformation, a monetary revolution. It's actually a protocol. But let's say that it's an asset. When you compare it against all of the other assets and stores of value, what we've seen is that Bitcoin has outperformed everything, not by a small margin, but by multiples, something like 8 to 9 times over the past decade. And so for anybody who's sitting there starting to think to themselves, will I have enough in retirement? How do I change the trajectory of my financial future if I'm in my mid-40s, I'm in my early 50s? How do I do that before it's too late? Bitcoin is the very thing that I believe provides that opportunity.
I love your framing of the world is shifting, and I 100% believe that. But it's sometimes hard to see, like I think sometimes we are very strong into this Bitcoin bubble and we see all the problems with TradFi. But if I think about the average, like 45-year-old Austrian, or like even, it's probably the same around Australia and America and Canada, all like the Western Hemisphere, I would imagine the experience is quite the same, where they have been paying into a pension system that they might be confident that they might get back or might be not confident that they get back, but their financial system mostly worked. So they have inflation, they're struggling to keep up with bills, but I'm not sure if everyone actually gets the connection that they're struggling and that inflation is one of the main problems of that. Maybe they blame the governments, maybe they blame their own company, the greedy corporations. Like there's so many things that like people like to blame, but actually I think there's only a small group of people that say like, hey, maybe it's the whole system, the financial system that's actually broken, that like steals from me silently. So I'm 100% with you. I'm just like, I'm not sure how many people actually see that like the system is broken, not like greedy corporations take all the money from me. I don't like, when I talk with people that are frustrated in the 45 years and they're around that age, they usually blame it on everything except the monetary system. Like if they are outside of the Bitcoin bubble. So I'm always curious how we get to the stage of like they are accepting that you first will not get a retirement that will be sufficient from the traditional financial system, except you are like really well earning and like you have a lot of savings yourselves, and like you basically have to care for your own pension at this point. Like and actually I see this more in the younger people, like under 30, the people say like, hey, I probably don't get a pension, so I have to care for it for myself. I even outside of Bitcoin, I see that. So I'm curious how you think how you think is the awareness of people that get to that stage of like, hey, how can I see Bitcoin as a solution versus the greedy corporations are not the thing that I should blame to?
Yeah, well, I think the greedy corporation is just a spin that, the powers that be put on it to kind of cover up the real problem. And, I think it was Milton Friedman, who was a prominent free market economist back in the 1970s. He won a Nobel Prize for his work. And he was the one that said way back then that inflation is not CPI, it's not consumer price index inflation, it's not the price of milk or bread or eggs going up by 30 or 40 cents per year. That's not real inflation. Inflation is taxation without legislation. And essentially what he was referring to was this phenomenon of money printing, currency debasement, and an understanding that if we are to save our time and energy in abstract form, which is our money, as Jack Mallers explains, and he's so right, you know, when we go and exchange our time and energy, our labor, our intellectual skills, you know, our capital, we create businesses, we do all of these things, we do it trusting that this thing that we'll receive in return, this currency, that it is going to hold its value. Okay, and this is the fundamental part that most people don't understand, because fundamentally most people just go to work and they blindly, because of the system we've been brought up in, we just blindly go and exchange our career, sometimes our entire lives, for this thing that we call money, not realizing that it's not actually real money. It's just a promise that is given to us by the central banks and by the governments that is going to be an adequate store of our time and energy in abstract form. And so if you circle back to Milton Friedman's definition of inflation, that inflation is taxation without legislation. Essentially what that speaks to is the reality that when central banks and governments are able to expand the money supply, effectively what they're doing is the same thing that they do when they increase your taxes, all right? Because they're diluting your purchasing power. But inflation is actually a sinister form of taxation, because it's one that we don't vote for, okay? It's one that we didn't have consensus among the people around. We just have to accept that this is the way things are. And so, you know, back in the 70s, they had quite a high inflationary period, and things that then leveled out for a while. We know that Nixon broke the gold standard back in 1971. And if you zoom out and you look at a historical currency price chart, you know, over the past, 50 odd years, what you'll see is that the US dollar, the Australian dollar, virtually every other currency, but even if you just said the US dollar, which is the world reserve currency, the most powerful currency and the most stable currency, has lost something like 92 to 93% of its value since that time frame, since 1971, since we've had a currency that is backed essentially by nothing other than faith. And so, you know, we can talk all day about the history of money and what led to central banking and how governments and central banks are able to, you know, create currencies and why they do that inside the debt-based system. And probably today's not the day for that conversation, but I think we just have to understand that if we're saving in any form, be it in our day-to-day life, okay, or be it for retirement, we need to be thinking very, very seriously now about how we're storing that value, how we're storing that economic energy. And unfortunately, if you're to store it in euros or store it in US dollars or store it in Australian dollars, you're essentially committing financial suicide, right? Because you are enabling the system to work against you. You are enabling the system to dilute your purchasing power year after year after year after year. And the reason, and how does this manifest itself into our everyday lives that we can see? Well, I think probably the most obvious case, I mean, I've got three children in their 20s, three daughters, and one of them thankfully made it into the housing market, but the other two aren't in there yet. And most of their peers, most of their friends aren't even thinking about getting into the housing market, which once upon a time was the great Australian dream. right? Because that was the way to kind of build a solid foundation for your life. But what we've seen over the course of the past 50 years is that you can no longer buy a home today, for the most part, even with 2 incomes, and sometimes you need 3 incomes coming into a household, whereas 50 years ago, you could buy a median price, average Australian home with 1 income. Dad could go to work, mum could stay home, they could raise a couple of kids, create a lot of stability in their life. Now, I'm not saying that things were perfect back then. There was a whole other set of issues that every generation experiences. But when it comes to quality of life and being able to, you know, enjoy time and to be able to value time and to be able to come home from school and have afternoon tea, sometimes with, you know, one of your parents or things like that, which we can't do anymore, it's all due to the fact that our money system is broken and the currency that we have trusted essentially can no longer be trusted. So, you know, it's, I think with understanding all of this, Robin, it just takes time. And I think, you know, you and I both know it's all about, you know, listening to Bitcoin podcasts and reading books like Larry Lepard's book, The Big Print, watching Joe Bryan's video on YouTube. What's the problem? I mean, what's a 40-minute video? And so if anybody out there who's listening to this is feeling somewhat uneasy and just intuitively in your gut, if you feel like things aren't quite right, you can feel the world is shifting, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is, you need to go and spend some time studying some of these resources out there, and it'll just help you to understand a little more around you know, what drives this cost of living crisis, growing wealth gap, the fact that young people now, you know, they're giving up on the great Australian dream and the great American dream. There's a reason for that, and it all comes back to the fact that the currency that we have and that we function under, we can no longer trust it. It's broken, and so therefore, we need to be looking at a new system. We need to be looking at a new store of value to protect our time and energy in abstract form, to protect our money. And of course, that's what we're here to talk about today. That is Bitcoin.
I love that. And if someone watches this and they are just getting started out, I mean, if someone already has like 10 Bitcoin, I mean, it might be a different conversation, but if someone is just like now seeing this video and they're like, hey, like I want to start out from scratch, but I feel like Bitcoin at 100K is so high, like how can it be doing anything? What is your message to people that are getting started now with Bitcoin?
Very simple. Start low and grow. Start low and grow, right? Because the reality is, Robin, and I know you know this, but this is obviously for the viewers, Bitcoin, it'll do your head in. If you fixate on the price too much and you try to time a perfect entry point, or you look at a price chart and you see that Bitcoin's price in the past 12 months is down 4%, or Bitcoin's price over the last 30 days is down, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20%, something like that. It'll do your head in and you'll get wrapped up in this mindset around volatility. But in doing so, it will cause you to miss out on what I believe is going to be the greatest wealth transfer of our lifetime. And what people really need to understand about Bitcoin is we've never seen anything like Bitcoin before. It's not like buying Amazon or Tesla or Nvidia. It's not like that. What Bitcoin actually is a monetary system, a new monetary system that is completely decentralized, meaning that no one entity, no one party controls it. Okay, it is permissionless, meaning that when you secure your savings in it, you don't need to consult with anyone in order to access it. There are no counterparties to your money, meaning that, again, you don't need permission from anyone. There's no oversight on what you actually have. Okay, there's nobody to tell you, as an example, that you've reached your limit today, right? And therefore you can't withdraw anymore, like we're seeing in Australia in the banks right now. So there's none of that with Bitcoin. And these are all kind of secondary features to Bitcoin that people realize a little later on. I mean, most people come to Bitcoin for one reason. They want number go up. They want to see their wealth in dollar terms increase. And that's okay. I mean, that is kind of what is going to happen during a transition. And that's where we are right now. We're still in this fiat mindset, this store of value phase. And most people who are coming to Bitcoin now, all they really care about is just seeing whatever they put into Bitcoin, seeing it grow and grow and grow. But the reality is that there's so much more to this than that. We have to understand that Bitcoin is fixed, finite. It is what's known as absolute scarcity. There is only 21 million Bitcoin as a hard cap. And most people that I talk to who are pretty new in their journey, they don't even realize that they can buy a fraction of a Bitcoin. There's 100 million Satoshis per Bitcoin. Okay, you can buy 1 million Satoshis right now today for around 1,300 Australian dollars. Okay, which is probably about, I don't know, 700 to 800 US dollars. 1 million Satoshis. Now that is a steal, that is a bargain in my mind when you understand where this is going. When you understand that one day, and I don't know when, but I am absolutely certain that one day one Satoshi is going to be equal to $1, right? Now, it might not be in our lifetime. It could be in your lifetime, Robin, or it could be, you know, in our kids' or grandkids' lifetime, but it is going to happen. And the reason for that is because this scarcity, this finite monetary protocol is doing exactly what it's designed to do. It is absorbing all of the energy, all of the financial premium out of the infinite monetary system. So you've got a finite monetary system absorbing the financial premium and the financial energy out of the infinite monetary system. And it's just a law of economics. I mean, we all went to school, and in our first economics class, we remember this thing called supply and demand, right? We've got to remember that Bitcoin, there's limited supply. Hard cap, 21 million. We know that something like 97, 98% of it is already out there. It's already been mined. And so the issuance of Bitcoin for the next, 120 odd years is only something like 1.5 to 2 million Bitcoin. And so when you understand this and you realize that 8 billion people around the world very soon, particularly with AI coming and with inflation and basically guaranteed into the future, more and more people are going to soon realize they're going to have this light bulb moment where they're going to realize, I need to store my energy, my economic energy, in an incorruptible form of money. And this is where they're going to realize they're going to have that penny drop moment like you had and like I had and like thousands of other Bitcoiners around the world have had, where we realize, holy shit, we've been sold a lie. We can't trust money as we know it. The thing that we call money is not really money. We start learning about the history of money. We start learning about central banking. We start learning about the war machine and how wars are funded through fiat currency. And then once we understand all of that, we realize Bitcoin was put here for a reason. Bitcoin came out on the back of a very chaotic time called the GFC, the Global Financial Crisis. The fall of Lehman Brothers in September 2008 sent shockwaves around the world. But in October 2008, there was a white paper, a 9-page document that was issued to a small forum group by this anonymous figure called Satoshi Nakamoto. And here we are 16 years on, and this protocol that was gifted to the world, and we don't know who Satoshi is. We can speculate, but we don't know, and many believe that Satoshi is no longer with us. But the reality is that we don't need to know. All we need to know is that we have this protocol that was a gift to humanity that is now available to all of us at any level and at any time. There are people in Africa right now who are trading in Satoshis. Why? Because they don't trust their currency anymore. If you've had your savings and your currency and your future decimated due to hyperinflation in countries like Argentina, Zimbabwe, Turkey, Lebanon, Venezuela, I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. It's just that we haven't experienced it in Australia. Americans haven't experienced it. Most of the European countries in the last 50 years haven't really experienced it. And so we think, well, that's just a problem for Africa, or that's just a problem for Lebanon. But it's not. It's not. It's a problem that's coming to each and every one of us.
The first thing that every Bitcoiner does, and the most important activity that every Bitcoiner keeps on doing, is buying Bitcoin. And I personally use Relai to buy and sometimes also spend or sell my Bitcoin. And there are two main reasons why I do so. The first one is it's Bitcoin only. They do not do any shit coins. They do not do any cryptos, any stocks or anything else. This is a tool, an app that is fully focused only and solely on Bitcoin. The second one is self-custody. They give you the keys to your Bitcoin the moment you buy them. You never give them the control over your Bitcoin, and you don't have to trust them because you can verify that you and only you have the keys to your Bitcoin. There's no third-party risk. There's no freezing of your assets. There's no rug pulling. There's nothing of that. Download Relai, the app, on your phone, or go to Relai.app on your browser and use code Robin to save fees and get cheaper Bitcoin. I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called Microseed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today, and you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. You're 100% dead and so much more. And that's why I pulled it up. Maybe you have seen it for a split second. I shared the screen already because this is a question that has been covered a lot, but I see it so many times. People ask me all the time, like, what is the number that you need to retire on Bitcoin? And of course, there's a lot of variables to that. First of all, like, where do you live? How much expenses do you have? Like, when do you want to retire? How much life do you have left? Like, it makes a difference if you're 70 or like 30 years old, of like how much runway you have. Like, there's a lot of variables in there. So just to preface that, I do not think there is one number for them all,
No.
obviously. But I found that from Sminston with, he was also on the podcast, I think just like once or twice. And he, wait, can we make that a little bit more beautiful? Like that. Yeah, that looks good. And he brought this up where he has those different charts of figuring out like how much Bitcoin do you need to retire at certain time frames. Now 2035 is an interesting time frame because it's just like 9 years. Like it's 9 to 10 years ahead. It's not that long. It's like if you're now like 40, it's like when you're 50, you already reached that. If you're now 30, like you reached in 10 years. 10 years seems maybe long, but it's like it will go faster than you might think. And he actually put it up in age brackets and in country brackets, which I freaking love. And so I just wanted to bring that up as maybe as a guide to the question that I will ask you with, like, how do you tackle the question of how much Bitcoin you need to retire? Like what is your framework to think about how many Bitcoin I might need to retire and at certain ages?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I tend not to focus on the number of Bitcoin. I tend to focus on what most people are familiar with in the first instance. Okay, while they're still getting their head around this, our frame of reference for most of us is still dollars. Okay, and so when I say, you know, you can set yourself up with a $2 million or a $5 million Bitcoin nest egg in the next 10 years, people understand what that means, right? If I say, you know, you need 3 Bitcoin to retire, and that's going to be worth whatever it's going to be in 10 years, people struggle with that because they haven't really got to that level of understanding yet around scarcity and hard cap and issuance of Bitcoin, and you know what that means in the I guess the ownership structure of the greater pie of Bitcoin as a store of value globally and all of that kind of stuff. And so I just focus on 2 things. Primarily, I utilize the reverse CAGR calculator, okay, which is a simple tool that you'll find. Just Google reverse CAGR or CAGR CAGR calculator. And I also post it as a default in my videos on YouTube, and a lot of people just find it very clarifying to just run some numbers. Now, the reverse CAGR calculator just essentially asks for 3 fields. The first thing it wants to know is how much capital are you looking to deploy right now? How many dollars are you putting into Bitcoin right now? Okay, and we'll come back to that because I've got some numbers here for you, Robin. But how much am I putting into Bitcoin right now in dollars? What is the expected CAGR, compound annual growth rate, that you anticipate Bitcoin will have over the next whatever period is? In the field below that, it wants you to put how many years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, how many years? So how much capital have I got? What is the expected compound annual growth rate that Bitcoin is going to have into the future? And in what time period are you looking to retire? Okay, is it 10 years from now, or is it 12, or is it 15? And when you do that and you understand a little about Bitcoin's price history and its growth rate history, and there's some great tools available online to be able to get clear on what those figures are. But just in a nutshell, over the past 5 to 10 years, Bitcoin's CAGR, compound annual growth rate, has averaged somewhere between 50 and 60%. Okay. Every other asset on Earth, on average, and I'm talking about real estate, stocks, bonds, gold, silver, fine art, collectibles, pretty much anywhere where people choose to store their savings, their value as an asset, everything else has averaged somewhere between 7 and 8%. That's over the past 10 years, okay? Now, we know that past history does not always guarantee future results, okay, in anything. But we know that the future usually rhymes with the past. There's usually some pattern that resembles what is going to happen in the future. And so I don't buy the argument when people say, oh, yes, but Bitcoin, you know, its time is up. You know, people who got in then, they were very lucky. And this 50 to 60% compound growth rate, well, that can't continue. Who says? Who says? When we are less than 5% adoption globally, right? And you understand that Bitcoin is a fixed, finite, hard cap monetary instrument that the world is going to need heading into this period of extended inflation, AI, all of the stars are aligning that are going to compel people to want to move to store of value assets that they can trust. Now, forever, for centuries and even 5,000 years, that system of money has always been gold. But in the digital age, you have to start rethinking that. Now, I'm not saying that gold's not a bad place to park your long-term savings. I mean, gold's done a tremendous job over the years of holding value over very long periods of time. But if you compare it to Bitcoin, there's really no comparison. And the other thing to keep in mind is that Bitcoin, unlike gold, it is absolutely scarce, whereas gold does have historically a 2% inflation rate. And as we're seeing this year, gold's price is up about 150, year to date, it's up about 70%, I believe, up to about $4,400. And so gold over the past 12 months has really outperformed Bitcoin by a lot. I mean, Bitcoin is down about 4 or 5% for the past 12 months. But getting back to your question, how all of this ties into how much you need to retire, what I like to do is just give people a bit of a understanding of what the landscape looks like in terms of most people, what they retire with in terms of their superannuation. In Australia, it's somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 that people age 60 to 64, that's how much they have in their 401k or their superannuation. That's it. And they're expected to live for the next 25 to 30 years off that $300,000 to $400,000. Now, it might be okay if you want to go camping, right, and not really travel the world and go skiing and go to nice shows and nice restaurants, and you're debt free and maybe just want to live a very simple life. Maybe that will get you there. But for most people, it's simply not going to be enough. And so if you look at CAGR and if you start working with some numbers and you say, let's take an example. If you were to deploy today $50,000 as an example, and most people of my age group, if we've done even a half of the right things over the past 30 or 40 years, we would be able to access $50,000 in some way. Most people, not everybody, but most people in this country. $50,000, if we know that Bitcoin's compound annual growth rate over the past 10 years has been up 50 to 60%, and if you forward project that out using the reverse CAGR calculator, $50,000 at 50% CAGR in 12 years' time would be $6.5 million. Okay. Now, even with inflation, even if inflation was running at 10, 12% in real terms due to money printing, even if it was 15%, even if it was 20%, you're still going to far outpace inflation in terms of what your nest egg is going to look like when you get there in 12 years' time. So $50,000 today at 50% compound annual growth rate in 12 years would be $6.5 million. Okay. If you looked at that and said, well, want to be a little more bearish. I think that Bitcoin's price growth is going to level out a little bit. I want to be a little bit more conservative, and you brought it down to 40%. $50,000 at 40% in 12 years is about $2.8 million. And so all of this really then comes back to a question of how much am I going to need? How much am I going to need? And that is a question that is very difficult because individual to individual, it really depends on a lot of things, right? But what I do know is that whether it's 2 million, 3 million, 5 million, 6 million, 10 million, 100 million, if you're starting from a relatively low base, if you're on path to have what the average Australian has, which is only $300,000 or $400,000 in your retirement account, and you are 10 to 12 to 15 years away from wanting to retire, then right now you can make a decision to get yourself into a position where you are likely to be financially free in the next 10 to 12 years. But you have to act now, because it's no good doing this when you get to the age 60, because then it's too late. Because what Bitcoin does, it's the ultimate way to store your value, for the simple reason that it compounds over time due to its scarcity. It just keeps compounding. And I think it was Albert Einstein who referred to compound growth as like the 8th wonder of the world. The longer you have your money compounding over a period of time, the longer that you have your capital exposed to that growth, the more exponential that growth becomes. So look, I tend to just help people to get some clarity, usually based on their situation. Most people I talk to, Robin, they have access to a couple of $100,000, maybe up to $400,000 or $500,000 in savings or capital, be it inside superannuation or outside superannuation. Sometimes it's a husband and wife who go and combine their superannuation accounts, and they go and set themselves up in this country with what's known as an SMSF, which is a self-managed super fund. All right. And when you have a self-managed super fund, basically the government says to you, we trust you to go and take care of your own retirement savings, but we need to check on you every 12 months to make sure that you're doing it right, to make sure that you're not spending the money and doing things that you shouldn't be doing before retirement age. So right now you can still do this, and you can roll over your industry superannuation, your traditional superannuation, into a self-managed superannuation, and then you can buy Bitcoin. And not only can you buy Bitcoin, but you can also take it into self-custody. So now there is no counterparties to your retirement account. And for some people, they're putting in $50,000. For others, they're putting in $500,000. I spoke with a guy a couple of weeks ago. He's deploying about $1 million straight into Bitcoin, a property developer. So, that end game, that end goal that we all have is very, very different. I like to focus on $5 million, because I believe that most people who start now, who have access to $100,000 up to maybe $200,000 or $300,000, if Bitcoin's historical growth does anything like what it's done in the past, if it continues at anything like that into the future, then people are going to be in a fantastic position in a decade or just over a decade. And $5 million, I think, for most people would represent a very comfortable retirement, not because of the $5 million per se when you get to retire. It's more so that if that $5 million is in Bitcoin, and even if you were to sell down $1 million worth of that to go and fund your lifestyle for 5 years, you wanted to travel, maybe pay down some debt, maybe take care of your kids or help them buy a house or whatever it might be. If you still got $4 million sitting in your retirement account in Bitcoin, even if Bitcoin's compound annual growth rate drops to what Michael Saylor predicts, which is 29-30% over the next 20 years, while you're out enjoying yourself around the world, right, because you're spending $1 million of your Bitcoin stack funding your retirement, that $4 million sitting in Bitcoin doing its 25-30% CAGR, that then turns into something like $15 million in the next 5 years. And this is how people start to create a financial legacy. And, my belief is so strong now, Robin, that there's no other asset on earth that gives people this opportunity that Bitcoin does, because of its scarcity, because of, we see all of these big players like the US government, the strategic reserve, institutions, strategy, Wall Street, all of these big pools of capital are all telegraphing that they're going to be accumulating Bitcoin, and little people like you and I, we still have this chance to stack some Satoshis before all of this capital comes into this monetary protocol. So it's there's no straight answer, Robin.
The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I finally and officially mine Bitcoin. This is not just something to stack more Satoshis, but it's most importantly also to support the network. Individual miners are the ones that keep the Bitcoin network decentralized. And by the way, you get KYC free Bitcoin. That's why I use Simple Mining. I get an actual proper Bitcoin miner. They set it up for me. They repair it if it breaks down. And most importantly, they let me choose the pool and even connect my own full node. I'm completely sovereign and I'm completely in control, and I can sign up with Ocean, no account needed. I just give them a Bitcoin address and then there's mining going on. No KYC, nothing. So if you're ready to mine Bitcoin, go to simplemining.io, tell them you come from Robin, and let's mine Bitcoin together.
Other than to say that there are some great tools out there, it's just about setting some targets, starting low, just building your confidence, and then just stacking gradually over the course of time. And as you do that, you'll find that the future for you just gets brighter and brighter and brighter.
I love that. And I thought about when you were talking about Kager, a tweet I recently made about the Kager of Bitcoin. And I, when I did that, I was seeing around the 70 or maybe like 65 or something like that, like around almost a 70 Kager over the last 10 years, which is crazy to think about that. And I thought to myself, okay, like what are the different price points that we hit? Depending on what Kager we have. And even with 25% Kager, which I think we will most definitely have, like 25 is more on the lower side, more on the conservative side. Even then, we almost hit $1 million in like 9 years, which is crazy to think about that. And I made the calculation, what if Bitcoin grows at the same rate? I think I took a 70% Kager. I think you talked about a 50% Kager. I don't know why my numbers are a little bit different, but probably like different starting points. But like you could end up at crazy prices in 2035 if you have the same one. So my point here was just like, if Bitcoin does anything like it did in the past, and I believe that it might actually do more, because we will hit a point of inflection where people get Bitcoin in a faster pace, like an exponential acceleration point. I mean, the power law people will be very mad at me, but I believe that it's possible that we hit like an exponential acceleration point where we, for a short period of time, let's say 5 years, we completely outperform all the Kagers that we had in the past because Bitcoin is growing so fast. Now, I could be wrong, and we just like slowly grow over time. But all that to say is like, if you just have a long time horizon of 10 years, 20 years, you will be more than fine if you just like keep on adding. And in your example with the 50,000 that you deploy, I mean, you shouldn't stop. Like if you have 50,000 now, like why not like put like $500 each month or like $100 even each month? This makes a huge difference. Like it makes a difference of having like 2 million or like 5-6 million at the end of your period where you accumulate. Like that's huge. So I love that you brought it up, and I really like seeing this like DCA, and then like, because you need motivation. You need to see the example of it. And I talked with that about with my girlfriend, because she started investing recently when she started earning and when she started working and all of that. And she saw the example of me, because I already do now 5-6 years, now almost 7 years now of working, earning every month a little bit more than I need. So like 7 years, I already accumulate every month a little bit more. Before it was Tesla shares, and now it's Bitcoin, Bitcoin shares, Bitcoin, yeah, just Bitcoin. And so seeing that transformation of having an average salary, I'm not a high earner by any means. In the last 7 years, I was a junior software developer, then a junior salesman, and now I'm a junior podcaster. So never had a huge salary, but just seeing how you can do it with a little salary, with a junior salary, a lot already, because you invest in things that make sense, and it accumulates over time. The compounding annual growth rate just over 7 years is like crazy. And I truly believe that if you just DCA into Bitcoin over the next 10 years, you make a lot more with your Bitcoin strategy than with your salary, no matter what you earn. If you earn $1 million, 10 million, or if you just earn like 50 grand or 40 grand or 30 grand, or even like 10 grand a year, you will out earn with your Bitcoin strategy your own salary by a far mile. And I just wanted to throw that in, because I think it's the compound annual growth rate and the DCA strategy, like, highly underrated, and people don't get the power of that over 10 years because they don't see the results tomorrow, which annoys me a little bit, but they have to have this like kind of low time preference to that.
Yeah, that's very true. But the thing too, what I say to my kids in their 20s, Robin, is like, in Australia, young people have always believed that they've got to save as quickly as they can and get into the housing market. So save a deposit, save a down payment. The problem today is that house prices have grown so quickly that in the 5 to 10 to 12 years, whatever it might be, that it takes you to save for a deposit for a house, the price of the house that you want to buy has just gone, it's probably doubled. And so now you can only buy half the quality of the house that you kind of set out to buy. And so it's very, very difficult now. And so, young people can no longer save their way to prosperity. And yes, they've got no choice but to, go and earn dollars for the work that they do. But where they do have a choice is in how they save, how they choose to save. And so I say to my two of my kids, I say, look, for you guys, I don't believe that it's smart for you to think about saving to buy a house, okay? Because of the rate of inflation, it's driving up house prices, and your savings just cannot keep up. But what you can do is you can save your surplus savings into Bitcoin. Now, so long as you don't need that money for the next 5 years, then things are going to be really good. If you're disciplined and you can just put away $100 a week, $400 a month, whatever it might be that you can manage after your expenses and your rent and what have you, if you fast forward a decade from now, my belief is that you're going to be so much further ahead than your friends who are all trying to either ignore saving for anything because they just want to have a good time, right, and spend all of their money, or even those who are saving their backside off to buy a house and then end up with a 50-year mortgage, right? Because in Australia now we've got this 5% down payment scheme that has just come in, and so a lot of people now, a traditional mortgage is like 30 years, but many believe that we're going to very quickly turn into a situation where we're going to have 50-year mortgages. So essentially a young person who's signing up for a mortgage, it's now a life sentence. For most people, it's now a life sentence that they will owe the bank for the rest of their life just to have a house. But if you look at what Bitcoin's doing and the way that it's repricing traditional assets, including real estate, And I would encourage anybody who has a home or a rental property to price that real estate that they have in Bitcoin and in dollars, in the currency that they live in. Price it 3 years ago, 5 years ago, and 10 years ago, and compare the price of that home in dollars with what the price would have been in Bitcoin. And you can get this information on ChatGPT or Google. It's not hard to find, but get the price of what that house was 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and get the same in Bitcoin, pricing that house in Bitcoin instead of dollars 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And what you'll quickly discover is that the price of that house, whilst it's gone up significantly in dollars or in euros, in reality, its price is actually falling when you price it in the hardest form of money we've ever seen, which is Bitcoin. And some of the viewers, Robin, may have seen that there's a chart that's floating around, just like a one-page picture of the price of a median price US home in 2016. I think it was like 660 Bitcoin. 2020, it was like 250 Bitcoin, and now a median priced home in America is like 12 Bitcoin, something like that. And so even though the house price keeps going up in dollars, when you price it in Bitcoin, which is the hardest money we've ever seen, you actually see the price of it going down. And so when you think about people who are trying to get into the housing market or save for a home, or a young person who's trying to get onto the property ladder, when they realize this, they start to think to themselves, well, hold on, if the price of an average home or a median priced home right now is like 10 Bitcoin or 12 Bitcoin in Australia, the median house price in Australia is now $1 million. Can you believe that? $1 million, which must be about seven Bitcoin, something like that, 7 or 8 Bitcoin. How long is it going to be before you can buy a house for 5 Bitcoin, for 3 Bitcoin, for 1 Bitcoin, for half a Bitcoin? And this is what's going to happen over the next several years. And so, we just need to understand where this is going. This is not speculation. This is like looking at what has happened in the past and then trying to reconcile what might happen in the future. Now, we can't guarantee what's going to happen in the future. It's not financial advice. This is just us saying, here is what has happened in the past. It's not speculation. It is factual. This is what has happened. And then you have to understand and ask yourself, well, what does the future look like for Bitcoin? Is Bitcoin's going to become more or less scarce? Is governments going to continue to print money, or are they going to stop? Right? So is there more demand going to income for Bitcoin around the world as people wake up to what this is? I mean, if we only have 5% adoption, how long before we go to 10%, 15%, 20% adoption? And how much demand is that going to create for this fixed form of money? And when you start to reconcile all of that in your mind, you start to realize that, Bitcoin there's a reason why it's been the fastest horse in the race for the past 10 years. And the only question to ask yourself is the environment such where that is likely to continue?
It's amazing to me, people that still invest in real estate. I mean, there is a small case of like, if you get super cheap interest rates, if you have very low down payment, and it's a good area and all of that, like maybe you can make an argument. But even then, it's like you have to care for it, like you have to clean it, like maybe you have tenants in there that pay rent, so it's more a business less than an investment vehicle or like a savings vehicle. So I don't know, like real estate, we covered it a lot, but like I don't get people that invest a lot of money in real estate. I think they just haven't really discovered Bitcoin yet. That's always like how I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, look, real estate in our country has been the way to create wealth over the past 50 years. Like, it's undeniable, okay? A lot of wealth has been created in real estate. Most Australians have their wealth stored in their family home. The majority of their net worth is stored in their family home. I mean, it could be argued that your family home is not an asset, right? It's more of a lifestyle, right? Whereas if you have rental properties or commercial property, then that is considered more of an asset. Your home, you know, it could be argued that it's actually a liability. You know, there's money going out of your pocket, not coming into your pocket. And so, you know, but then having said that, there are people who have done very, very well out of the Australian real estate market, even in the last 5 years since the health crisis, where we've seen house prices double and even triple in some areas. In fact, I saw a guy the other day, a real estate guy, his name's Tom Panos, and he was doing a little short clip on his Instagram. He was in Byron Bay, which is one of the most well-known holiday towns in Australia. And he was standing out front of the Byron Bay pub, which is this iconic pub that's just across the road from the beach. It's been there forever. And he was showing the transaction prices of this pub. And I think the last time it changed hands was in 2019, something like that, or it might have been 2020. Anyway, 5 or 6 years ago for 70 million, and it's just changed hands for $140 million. So in 5 or 6 years, the price of this iconic pub on this amazing block of land across the road from the beach in this iconic location has doubled in 5 years. And so, you know, there are people who have done very well out of real estate in this country. It's completely undeniable. The problem is that how are things going to look once the baby boomers, who are controlling the vast majority of that property wealth, once they pass on? What then? Is there going to be a market for this multi-million-dollar real estate? Who's going to be able to buy these houses coming through, right? And so, you know, some of that obviously will stay in the family and will form part of the inheritance and all of that. But, you know, it's very difficult to argue against real estate historically in this country. But I don't believe that the future is going to play out quite the same, because it's just becoming so unaffordable. And once we move, a generation passes on, it's just going to be fascinating to see how all of this plays out. I don't think we're going to have any crazy crash or anything like that. I just think that the financial premium that is sitting in real estate is going to be absorbed by Bitcoin, right? Because Bitcoin is going to be recognized as the new pristine form of real estate, or digital capital, or whatever you want to call it, that people are going to want to flight to, because they don't want to have their real estate tied down to a particular state or jurisdiction where the government can just tax it at will, right? They can't move it anywhere. And people are going to realize that it makes more sense to have their capital parked not in real estate, but in digital real estate that they can move anywhere at any time. Decentralized, nobody can change the rules on it, permissionless, no counterparties. And I just think that's where we're heading. And look, I talk with a lot of real estate professionals, people who have property development companies, who have come to me and they've wanted to ask me how they can onboard into Bitcoin in the best possible way, learn about self-custody, all of those kinds of things. And they tell me, this is unsustainable. Australian real estate is unsustainable. And these are people who own businesses that are, you know, doing hundreds of millions of dollars worth of real estate sales every year. So, you know, it's going to be very interesting, Robin, to see how it all plays out. Australians do have a love affair with property, so it's a very difficult thing for us to break. But I think slowly people are starting to realize that Bitcoin is a much more savvy form of real estate as we move into this digital age, and as governments around the world centralize more and more control, I think people who are in real estate, they can feel it every year. Their rates and their land tax and everything just goes up, gets more and more expensive, their insurance, and it just gets to a point where it's like, yeah, no, I can't afford to hang on to this anymore. The capital growth has been great, but now I'm at a point now I want to get rid of it, not have the obligations, and put my capital somewhere else. And more and more people are starting to think that way.
I think so too. One topic that I think maybe Bitcoiners aren't as good about, and I was also not as good about in the past, but I feel like there could be a real, like you never want to be in a situation where you want to sell your Bitcoin, and there is then a use case of a small emergency fund, of fiat on the side, of not having 100%. Like if you're all in Bitcoin, maybe it makes sense to declare that all in as like 90% and have like some percentage in fiat. And I historically haven't done that. I'm just starting to do that because I see that I really don't like to sell my Bitcoin. Now I also earn in Bitcoin, so I do have to spend Bitcoin. Otherwise, like I have to borrow against it or like something else, and I don't like to do that. So I am anyways forced to sell my Bitcoin. But additionally, I like the idea of having an emergency fund in fiat. Now, this is becoming more popular these days because even Strategy did it. I don't know if this is comparable. I don't know, a $2 billion fiat emergency fund that Strategy now has, and we like putting like maybe 10 grand into euros or like 20 grand. I don't know if this is a fair comparison, but how do you think about going as hard as possible in Bitcoin, but maybe still having some Australian dollars, US dollars, euros, or whatever on the side to not be forced to sell if there's like, I don't know, the roof breaks or like the car breaks down or something like that?
Look, I think it's just smart practice. My attitude when it comes to Bitcoin is put in Bitcoin what you don't need foreseeably for the next 5 years. That's how I look at it. This is capital that once it's in Bitcoin, it's not, if something goes wrong and I need some cash to deal with a situation, in all likelihood, I'm not going to need to touch that. Okay. So I think anything beyond that, where you feel, well, gee, I might need this in 6 months or 12 months or 2 years, or, my daughter's got a wedding coming up, touch wood, something like that, where you think to yourself, gee, we might need this, then yeah, I think it's very smart to have that sitting in cash, or even in Australia, most people with their house, they have a redraw facility or a line of credit where they might have it sitting there, just if they need to pull some out, they can access it. So yeah, I'm not a believer that you should go all in and put everything that you've got into Bitcoin. I don't believe that we're at a time yet where that makes sense, because we haven't transitioned into this circular economy yet where it's easy to spend your Bitcoin. Now, will we be there in 3 years or 5 years? Maybe. I mean, we're seeing signs that could happen. We're seeing, Square, Jack Dorsey's company, rolled out, I think, 4.5 million merchants in the US very recently, something like that, meaning that businesses now can ask for their customers to be paid in Bitcoin. And I think the more that we see that over the next few years, the more that it's going to become less important to hold cash, and we will be able to have Bitcoin maybe a little bit in a hot wallet, Maybe some, fund our Lightning wallet so that we can buy a coffee or pay for a haircut or the mechanic or whatever it might be. Maybe that's 3 years away, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years away. And at that point, then maybe it'll make sense to be all in Bitcoin, because then you can just spend Satoshis for the things that you need. But until we get to that point, I think now is a time to just be still thinking about Bitcoin as a store of value, building for the future, being patient, having a 5-year time horizon and above. And so just put into Bitcoin, in my opinion, what you feel is really your long-term savings, and then everything else, just in instruments, cash, even shares that are easy to liquidate perhaps, or line of credit on your home. I think that it makes more sense to store anything that you need there. And I probably, to be honest, Robin, I'd probably feel better about that rather than having it sitting in cash in a bank account, to be honest with you.
I like that. Before we get to the end routine, I have one question to ask each and every one of my returning guests on the podcast. And the question is, what have you learned outside of Bitcoin since your last appearance on the podcast?
It's a really good question. I've probably learned that I need to be thinking more deeply about the whole plan B side of things, so yeah, just getting my head around what that looks like. If we end up in a situation where, the country where we live in becomes more and more difficult in terms of its policies, if CBDCs look like they're going to come in, just paying attention, I think, to the landscape more closely, and considering seriously what the options might look like for Plan B and all of that, I think is probably the biggest thing that I've learned since we last spoke. And so I'm spending quite a bit of time studying that and asking the right questions around that.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a topic that I see most Bitcoiners who have figured out self-custody, and most Bitcoiners who have figured out Bitcoin and running their own node and all of that, they usually then, as next step, going into like, oh, now I'm the risk factor. Like my physical thing is the risk factor. Like, how can I be more decentralized in the world and have maybe not a passport, maybe have like if my country goes rogue, maybe where can I go, and all of that. So very true, and very important in those worlds where war seems to not be eroded away, but like be in trend. And so it's really, really important. Then one thing we always do at the end of the podcast is our end routine, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asks you the question, what is your best financial advice you ever received that has nothing to do with Bitcoin?
That wealth is built over time. It's all about accumulation over a long period of time. The earlier you start, the easier that it is. And so just letting time work for you. So it's not timing in the market, it's more about time. And I think that applies to Bitcoin, and I think it applies to pretty much any other wealth creation strategy.
100%. I love that. Really cool. And thank you so much, Zane, for being on my podcast. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
I'm predominantly on YouTube, my YouTube channel at Zane Truscott. You can find me there. I put out pretty much 3-4 videos a week. And that's probably the best place to find me. I'm also on X and on Instagram. I'm not super active on those platforms, but certainly on my YouTube channel, I've got my details there on my channel if people want to check it out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zane, for being on. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.